Bungalow Bill here, and welcome to From the Depths. Today, I decided that I just want to fight big battleships against other big battleships. And I've also declared that the ship is finished, even if there's probably quite a lot of work that I could have done. In addition, I'm dropping the Livewood Neater series for now, and the reasoning behind that is just that the last episode I tried to record, I was getting even more stuttering. The later and later I've been going into the campaign, the more stuttering I've been getting. I'm assuming it's related to the enemy AI running, but it does it even in combat, and it got unplayable. If they fix it, I'll resume the series, but until that happens, I'll be in the designer mode, and maybe I'll do an Ashes of the Empire campaign or something that's on a smaller map with smaller vehicles that maybe I won't have such performance problems. Anyway, this is not an episode where I showcase a vehicle. This is just an episode where I fight vehicles. I'll still go over sort of the overall stats and the build of this vehicle so that you know what I'm using. But it's not going to be in-depth, so this will be fairly brief. So I've called this vehicle the 5th season, although the name is going to change to the 5th season before I put it on the workshop. You'll see when I hit the V menu that it is currently not the 5th season. So, she's primarily about railguns, and there are 2 APS turrets with 4 barrels each, 2 AP EMP, 2 AP HE, and they're running off of 8-meter autoloaders. These turrets are built in a necklace style, so there's a turret cap with some fairly heavy armor to hopefully reduce penetrating shells going into it, and then it's pretty much just drops vertically under the deck line. There's no lip here. This does prevent me from doing any water pump cheese in the turret because it doesn't recognize the top of the turret ring. And then because it's a railgun vehicle, there's just a lot of engines in the middle. This is sort of designed to be run efficiently in the campaign mode, as it's kind of a fan build. Like, this is the sort of thing that you could practically use in a campaign. So these are fairly efficient engines. I could use steam engines to make this area significantly smaller, but that would come with some downsides as well. The sheer number of blocks here cause this to be a significant target for enemies. So this is where the armor belt stops. For reference, it's actually in line with the indented wall of the citadel, which means that the area that's actually armored is really small, or is a really narrow corridor on the inside of this. Is basically just from this turret across. That means that these cram cannons and everything out from there is actually outside of the armor belt. These cram cannons do not pack much firepower. There are 6 of them. It's about 15 firepower each for a total of 90, but that's because they're loaded up with hardener pellets, and these are deck penetrators. So these will penetrate, because decks and ships tend to be very lightly armored. These will penetrate like the Megalodon and other endgame godlies. If you can hit the Singularity, they'll penetrate that as well. This ship doesn't have much of a chance against the Singularity because the lambs are so fantastically strong on it that my shells can't get through because they're payload. If they're pure kinetic, maybe. We're still way cheaper than the Singularity though, so we might do damage, but we wouldn't win. And then for armor, the armor belt itself isn't that substantial, but when you count everything past it, it's very substantial. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's all that there is to the armor belt. But then there's 5, 6, and 7. And the math gets a bit worse for enemies attacking if you're punching through any of this other stuff. Because that 7 is, below the waterline. If you're trying to get through above the waterline, there's a lot of nasty stuff in the way, a lot of airspace. If you have pen depth fuses, if you're using HE, heat, that sort of thing, you're going to have a really bad time getting through this armor belt. And it's very similar to the top. This has extremely heavy deck armor, because There's a layer of metal. If you go over the engines, there's actually one more. It's heavy armor instead if you're over the AIs or a few other components like the ammo. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, and then 6. So this is very resilient to top-down missile attacks. Not so much underneath. There's 2 layers of metal and some torpedo interceptors to try not to die to torpedoes. The sheer size of this makes it fairly resilient to EMP, but there are some surge protectors as well. These are close-range missiles to try to avoid getting killed by ramming vehicles. They're okay, they're not fantastic. These Sea-Wiz cannons are pretty weak. They're more for show than anything else. They can shoot down vehicles, they're not so good at missiles. Missiles of the class that will be shooting at this. So there's a pretty reasonable chance that I'm just going to get rid of the Sea-Wiz controller on them and have them just shoot down enemy vehicles, because this currently has issues with nukes, which we may or may not see when I put it against the Imperium. It should win anyway. Anyway, that's enough for the intro. Let's just spawn in some big ships and let them shoot against each other. I have spawned in the Stronghold, and the Stronghold is the most direct competitor for the 5th season. They're almost exactly the same cost at 1.4 million materials, and they have fairly similar amounts of firepower. The 5th season's a little bit higher. The 5th season has, other than our shields, has no defense against the cram cannons, other than these really wimpy Sea-Wiz that I may remove the Sea-Wiz controllers to later. So she has to tank basically anything above the waterline that the Stronghold throws at her. The Stronghold's torpedoes will have a much harder time getting through, but the Stronghold's biggest weapon is going to be its Alpha Strike. So we've launched our mortars. I'm also using automatic detection setting set to 1, those mostly missed, which means that we are using target clusters of blocks doesn't work, it's all target random blocks. The reason I'm doing this is because my mortars don't seem to hit without it. So we're seeing one of our weaknesses right here is that we're trying to turn at a slightly sharper angle so both of our guns can fire, but sometimes we have troubles with that, but we've managed it now. So without setting automatic detection to 1, I cannot get mortars to hit no matter how good the detection is on my craft. They just will not do it. That's unfortunate. Bounce off the shield. These don't have inertial fuses because they need to penetrate the deck. They have pen-depth fuses instead. Another bounce, but we got a penetration. Not a good location that was chosen. These can be very nasty. Looks like we're getting some good EMP strikes there. Huge lag spike. Let's check out what's happened. Not as much as we'd expect. We can see that we've been doing a lot with our missile interceptors against the torpedoes. I think that there might be a mortar bug because of the issues that I'm having. We're still at 97%, down to the 86% of our enemy, the Strongholds. We have retained most of our firepower. We've lost a little bit of cram predominantly. Let me turn off my repair tentacles. I forgot to do that. They're of almost no value because of how large we are, but I still don't want them to be there, and I'm going to stop giving commodities as well. We have plenty, so we don't really need it. Enemy actually has a large amount of firepower as well. That was a good hit, though. That went right through the upper deck of the turret, it looked like. And we just eviscerated it there. 2 more directly through the upper deck of that turret. Probably no more firepower to it. Something else to point out, we are using base bleeder rounds. So they will skip off the water surface. I'm not only targeting blocks below water. I seem to get actually a significantly higher amount of value than I think from shells that go below the waterline. But I did do an experiment recently where I was just testing out mortars a lot, and I kept thinking, okay, maybe these aren't working because my detection isn't good enough, because like I turned off automatic detection and all of a sudden I couldn't hit with mortars. But I just kept adding more and more detection until my detection was sub-meter, so that against a lot of targets I would, have 0.1 to 0.5 meters of inaccuracy, because I still had to have my averaging time fairly low so that my railguns are capable of hitting fast-moving enemy vehicles. So there was a floor to how accurate I could get my detection. But I was still wildly inaccurate with mortars. If I was fighting something, well, not like the Stronghold that's completely stationary, but something that's even moving just a little bit, my mortars would just be all over the place. It was really ugly. And then if I turn on automatic detection, they just home in like lasers. Like, you can hit the singularity with mortars. Not a huge percentage of the time, but you can do it. And it looks like the Stronghold is despawning. Let's look at the damage. It looks like we've basically just been scratched. I don't have our shields visible. There's very heavy shielding around the important portions of this vehicle. So, some Citadel damage. That cram cannon's missing, but nothing else is, so nearly full firepower. Alright, let's spawn in something a little bit heftier. And here we have the Imperium, which I did a showcase on recently where I showed off her strengths and weaknesses, and I had some mixed success with killing her with armor-piercing shells in the past, because when she's at an angle like this, it can be very hard to get them deep enough in. However, she has some significant vulnerabilities to AP EMP, as well as APHE to some extent, and when she turns to broadside, it can get pretty brutal. So previously in my testing, I hadn't really managed ever to down her without AI deading her. I have had it happen in one shot, or one salvo. So these railguns are pretty serious. That one's disengaging. We should turn in a little bit more. This looks like one of our CWIS guns, the top of our tower. Not that significant. Yeah, now we're turning back in. We have a little bit of trouble at the start of combat sometimes if the enemy comes straight at us. We're a bit of a slow turner. These missile pods actually used to be more CWIS cannons, but they were way too much in the way. Okay, looks like we took out that nuke. I seriously doubt it detonated itself. Near misses with those crams. And I believe that was our first volley as well. Once the Imperium gets onto more of a steady state, she can be hit with mortars. When she's turning at a steep angle, it won't happen. But it is something that can absolutely happen. Check out the percentages. Relatively even. Near miss. Near miss. That was my stats. 651. That's still pretty good. The Imperium's holding out better than usual, I think. These battles are very hit or miss. That looks like we hit with that cram shot. Something big just happened right there. Now, both we and the Imperium have suffered a significant amount of damage. This is actually a little bit of a harder fight than it usually is, but I think we're weathering it okay. 991. I believe our main guns are still online. Although our CWIS on the side has been completely taken out, as well as our cram cannons. All of those are on the wrong side of the armor belt, and they're not terribly important. It looks like the Imperium is barely above the water at this point, and is now severely lacking in firepower. We are not having fantastic choices of those blocks. That's a little bit better looking. We will get over pens because I'm not a big believer in pen depth fuses. And there she goes. That was a fairly significant hit. And there's no more AI. So that was the Imperium, 88%. But we have basically all of our important firepower is still there. If we changed broadsides and fought on the other broadside, we would basically be a fresh ship. And the Imperium is sort of what we were designed to fight against because of our base bleeder rounds and our AA mantlets. We're more focused on fighting aircraft than watercraft. Give our armor belt a bit of a check. So our significant deck armor, oh yeah, we needed a few more of these for my detection, but just chuck them in there because there are enough room in the AI compartments, and they're not that important. So this is starting to poke in at the AI compartments, and we don't have a lot of AI redundancy, so that can be a little bit harsh. But for the most part, armor belt held up really well. Alright, let's spawn in the next vehicle. Now I have spawned in the Great White, and she is the closest ship in our weight class that the Steel Striders have at 1.3 million materials, although only at a 0.6 difficulty rating, and to some extent we will see why that is. Alpha Strike, which is the most concerning thing that we have to worry about. Since we were already moving at full speed, it will be fairly accurate. Fortunately, that's not going to get all the way into the turret, and we just have to hope that there aren't any more shots at the turret. Some fairly hefty AP EMP and AP HE coming through. One of the guns has been disabled, and that was a fairly hefty internal explosion taking out cram components. Some overpens at bad choices of blocks, but the Great White is not looking so healthy already. But still has a fair bit of firepower going, although we just decapitated a turret. And our mortars are not that useful here. Getting a little unlucky there. Bounce, and another bounce. That one got through though, and those hurt. We must have taken out the lambs for that to happen. I don't think we've dealt that much, never mind. I was gonna say that we haven't dealt that much damage to the missiles. I don't think that there are any missiles left from the Great White. Actually, I'm gonna check firepower again before I check us. 540, but I think a lot of that is probably offline. I don't think the Great White is firing back anymore. Let's actually snap to the vehicle so that we move along with it. So we had a fairly hefty hit here, although it didn't really substantially crack in because of our spaced armor against the explosive. Here as well, not that damaging. Here as well, that this mortar is completely outside of the heftier portion of our armor belts. It isn't really that important, so I don't care that much about losing it. This is the biggest shot. These turrets do not have much upper armor on them, so they can be chopped through from above. It's not a big deal against most of the high-power railguns, but you can get got by cram cannons. And that looks like it for the Great White. Let's bring in something a little bit spicier. And here she is, the benchmark against which all other ships are rated, and a fairly fair comparison given that she carries railguns, and, well, sits at a significantly higher weight class, but is also a displacement vessel. So let's get going. Those were some very significant shots right off the bat. I doubt the Mega's that happy. Oh, the Mega's turning onto a left broadside first. She's going to get really close to us. It doesn't seem like that would be a huge issue for us, but it actually is. We can have trouble maintaining an angle where we get particularly good firing. However, it looks like we've had some very good shots so far. The Meg's forward guns are not entirely online. Also, when the Meg gets very close, it gives us significant issues defending against her torpedoes. Our forward gun has swiveled off, unfortunately. We're having trouble maintaining an angle because of the Meg, who has severe steering problems. However, I do not think that we've taken significant damage. We are still at nearly all of our firepower. And the Meg is pretty toast. We're chopping off turrets left and right. She's gotten close enough that we're firing our anti-close weapons, which are predominantly AP with one explosive warhead each, and they use IR detection, so I guess they're going for the engine on the Meg, although I thought the engine was more centralized. I could be a bit wrong about that. And a bounce. We haven't been that lucky with these mortars so far, but those mortars can absolutely ruin the Meg's day. They can actually... There are godlies that they can one-shot. Both of our main guns are online now that we've turned into a more favorable angle. Our broadside angle that we're allowed is not very steep. We really try to maintain a fairly flat angle, but we are a little bit slow in combat because I do use the main drive engines to produce energy for the railguns. We do use steam engines for the power, and I don't load them completely. I have a limit set to them so that their RPM just doesn't completely tank. But it does slow us down. Outside of combat, we move at about 33 meters per second. Inside, it's more like 22, 23. Let's check percentages. Yeah, the Meg's not that happy. This is usually about how it goes. The Meg is actually not that bad against EMP. A lot of the godlies that I'll show off really suffer against it. The Meg has protection, so it's not nearly as bad. At this point, everything else looks like a formality. The Meg will keep fighting to a fairly low percentage, but she doesn't have a whole lot left going on. Some decent mortar strikes. They're shockingly painful for the low investment in them, but there's just such a high RNG weapon. So this is the side we haven't been taking damage on. Side that we have, glancing blow to the turret. There are decos on the front, so it can be a little hard to tell, but I don't think there's that much damage to it. Super cavitation rounds from the Meg, so maybe a little bit under the waterline more than other vehicles. Still not that bad. I don't really see anything really threatening to get through. I think we took off the Meg's turrets too quickly. She's outmaneuvering us a little bit to stop our broadside, but there's really not much she can do at this point. Also, I thought that the Onyx Watch logos would look okay, but they're not the same green as the rest of the coloration, so they don't match that well. At some point, maybe I'll replace them with an image that does match, or I'll color correct it, but I just wanted to use the one that came included with the game files, so I didn't have a choice over the color. You can also see Z fighting on our deck. That's because the deck is actually mimics. Some of the deck is alloy over the less important sections to keep down weight, and some of it's metal over the more important sections. But I wanted it to look like metal everywhere, so I put decos over it. And I just used the default ones when you just hit Control-Shift-X, and it scales them up by like 0.5% or something. Maybe it's even less than that, but I found later that you can see Z fighting from a certain range, so they need to be scaled up by a little more than that to cover the deck a hair more to stop the Z fighting. Anyway, the Meg doesn't really have much more going on, and there isn't really a nastier vehicle than we can fight that will win against, because we're not going to beat the Singularity. But let's show some of the other factions' godlies just fight a few more big ships against a few more big ships. Now I have spawned in the Redeemer, which Borderwise did a video about recently, actually. And, well, she is not that scary. She is about the same cost as us, a little bit less firepower, about the same armor percentage, actually, which is very high for white flares. And unlike us, she's got a very colorful underside. Between the torpedo poppers and these, she does not float without these. This is illegal for Neater, but the Godly Craft have never really cared about what's legal and what isn't, apparently. But I'm a little less than pleased about that. However, despite her significant levels of armor, she goes down to a shelling very quickly. We did bounce a few, though. We missed and bounced a lot there. Alright, the Redeemer has got her shells online. Missiles incoming. I just saw the first EMP splash from our side, but yeah, definitely more EMP hits. I've seen a few big HE hits. Redeemer's down 3%, we're down 1%. We don't really care about missiles going to the deck unless they're a massive alpha strike. Think we got her with... no, I think that mortar was a miss. I wasn't looking at exactly the right spot. These... Glancing blow, we didn't choose a good target for it. However, there's AI components coming out and no more Redeemer. It doesn't really matter if we use... Oh, and yeah, she's sinking. Ships in Neater shouldn't sink when they lose AI. But that's it. And even if we don't use AP EMP, I think just the relatively thin armor scheme, maybe it's because it's all alloy, but even that, the actual armor value of it isn't that important to us. So, might not make a huge difference. But APHE is good enough to take out our AI compartments. It probably is for ours as well. Like, we probably couldn't weather our own fire as well as we should, so like some of my other ships, I should have more AI redundancy to keep us fighting. This ship could probably have 4 AIs pretty easily, but didn't do it. Anyway, a few more ships to go. And this time we have the Sovereign, who is a fairly nasty customer and is the Scarlet Dawn's most direct competitor to us because she comes in at almost exactly the same cost, although about half of our volume. We're about 100,000 on the volume count, but we have very sparing use of heavy armor. And similar to us, it's an APS vehicle, although it's more focused into one gigantic turret, whereas we're focused into 2 gigantic turrets. We are designed to fight this sort of thing, but our mortars aren't going to do us any favors this fight. We are getting some very nasty hits in. We have smoke, so we don't care that much about lasers. Not that the Sovereign has the scariest lasers. I believe that these are thump damage, which is not super terrifying for us. Yeah, that's definitely thump. However, our penetrators can be very scary to the Sovereign, depending on where we hit. Oh, but still near misses on those mortars. And those mortars are just... they're lethal for Scarlet Dawncraft. Scarlet Dawncraft cannot tank that. Alright, those are some hits into the turret caps. I don't think we took anything super fancy out there. So yeah, pretty similar firepower. We have pretty similar firepower as well. It looks like we've lost a little bit of cram and a little bit of APS, but those are probably just our secondaries. Another hit to the turret. That time there's APS components coming out. So I think the Sovereign, despite having more percentage than us left, is not feeling so good right now. We did not hit the upper deck with those. And that's just about, well, a little more than half of our APS firepower, so not that bad. We have lost a significant amount of the top of that turret, but it looks like it's still firing. We have still got almost all of our APS. These gun barrels are very long, so they're not quite as effective when they're trimmed this far back, but they still do a sufficient amount of damage. And there's no ship to look at anymore. Still got an AI. Where are you? But probably APHE doing damage to the lift systems. These Scarlet Dawn vehicles, once they start getting penetrated by APHE, are just not in a good situation. We might be able to take them further out faster with just pure kinetic, but this is very deadly as well. And let's see, I think there is maybe one more Scarlet Dawn vehicle to fight, and I think that's pretty much it. And here we have the Dire Harvest, who is a particle cannon broadsider. She's the other direct competitor that we have in the Scarlet Dawn, because her cost is fairly similar to us, just 100,000 more. Armor cost, very low though. We are, however, a decent counter to her, because the only way you can defend against particle cannons is armor, and we have armor. That might have been a leftover mortar from the last fight, but at least I didn't hit her with it. That's a nice big deco coming out. It looks like it loses its color when it comes out. We either got close enough to shoot a missile, or Don't know. That doesn't look good though. I think that's actually still a fair amount of particle cannon firepower there left. Not sure how much of it can still fire though. We on the other hand took 1%. I saw a lot of particle cannon stuff going aft. We didn't take that much damage. Yeah, there's really not much going on there. I don't know what happened, but we did not take much damage, and I think the Dire Harvest is pretty much done. I've heard people say that APHE has the fastest time to kill on a lot of these Scarlet Dawn vehicles, and that's probably got to be the case. Although we're mixed 50-50 with that in APHE. I don't think EMP is as overpowered right now as some other people think it is. I think it's changed. I think you have to build differently around it now than you used to. The way it travels is different. There is potentially a bug around that. I heard someone saying something on the Discord, but don't actually know if that turned out to be true. Oh yeah, we can sneakily shoot underwater like this. That's one of the reasons the barrels are so long. The other one is because we have a massive amount of gunpowder. But not sure if that was actually true or not, but they posted some evidence that EMP can sometimes hop to the origin of a vehicle randomly. Don't know. Anyway, even before I put surge protectors here, this vehicle was... Ooh, actually we got our barrels... Oh, I was gonna say, we got our barrels really snipped. No, we didn't. We might be shooting ourselves a little bit, though. Even before I put surge protectors on the 5th season, she was phenomenally resilient to EMP. Just because of her sheer size and the fact that metal and lightweight alloy now actually provide decent protection. It's not good protection. On a small vehicle, it'll do almost nothing. On a vehicle this size, small EMP strikes are significantly mitigated by it. However, that's as much a bad thing as it is a good thing, because it means that small EMP strikes are more localized, which means that you can't just put surge protectors on the outside of everything and expect it, or sort of on the edges of your ship and expect it to pull everything away. The small EMP strikes just won't really see them as a viable target and will still go to the inside of your ship, whereas large EMP strikes might still go for them. Definitely more complicated than it used to be. And these AP EMPs are really scary because they can deliver the EMP payload in the middle of your ship, where there just might not be any surge protectors to absorb it. Anyway, I have one more ship that I want to fight against, and then we'll wrap up the episode, I believe. Alright, I have a familiar sight spawned in here. I usually don't put other creators' crafts into my videos because even though they might put them out there for other people to use, it's still not something that I'm that interested in just dropping their crafts into my vehicles and into my videos and beating them up because, you know, why am I going to show the ones that beat me up? Although, you know, I might. However, we have a 200,000 materials advantage against the Stall Slung, which is significant. Less significant than some of the ones that we fought up against. And we're also using railguns to hurt crams, although her crams can hit us, and that's a significant advantage. However, her lambs will do absolutely nothing, and it's reasonably significant. There's a fair amount of cost in here. There's a fair amount of cost in missile interceptors, torpedo interceptors, that sort of thing, and none of it's going to do anything. But that's not why I'm putting up the Stall Slung, and neither is it to just beat up on her. It's because a lot of the enemy faction vehicles, especially from the Grey Talons and Scarlet Dawn, didn't really get built with EMP in mind, and even the Stall Slung didn't get built with this revision of EMP in mind, but I wanted to put in something that another person had made so that we could see the APHE and AP-EMP from that perspective. This is the latest version of the Stall Slung, as far as I can tell in the workshop, and both her and my vehicle are spawned on AI teams at 1,500 meters in a broadside. So let's check out these Doom Crams. significant amount of damage coming in, mostly armor that took damage, but we did lose a barrel. Not enough to take off a percent. And now we're taking the kinetic missiles. We have a staggering amount of deck armor, though, so a little bit of EMP in there, too. Neither of those are something that we're particularly worried about. We will have a little bit of trouble doing... Oh, never mind. This happens sometimes when you shoot against canoes with railguns. Usually we have trouble hitting some of the stuff that's underwater. But that time we either put AP EMP or APHE directly into the AI compartment, and this just happens. The other thing is these deck penetrators they go all the way in. Whatever they hit just dies. So missile compartment, ammo compartment, turrets, that sort of thing. But this was to give just another perspective that it's not just enemy faction craft that die that quickly to the stuff, and the AP EMP is really nice sometimes, but well, the APHE does a sufficient amount of work most fights. I think actually against a lot of craft that have EMP protection in mind, the APHE is significantly stronger than the AP EMP. We'd probably be better off on this craft in that regard instead. Anyway, this is my Onyx Watch fan build, and I hope you've enjoyed watching it. There's definitely a bit of laziness here, especially towards when I started to get to the end and built the bell tower and that sort of stuff. I was starting to run out of patience and wanted to move on to something else, but overall, I'm relatively happy with the craft, and it's not great by any definition. I've seen other things that people post onto the Discord. I've seen some of my viewers' craft as well, so I know that there's some really nice stuff out there, but for me at least, she feels like a little bit of a step up. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed watching, and I will see you in the future.